So I am Matthew, the recently appointed team leader for the BioImage Archive, and I'm going to tell you about the archive, about where it is now, how it relates to other data resources, and what our roadmap is for the future. So the BioImage Archive is a resource hosted at EMBL EBI that takes bioimaging data for the scientific community with a very broad scope, which I'll get onto in a minute, and with the intention of helping science in four main ways. Firstly, to make publications based on imaging data more reproducible and auditable by providing open access to the image data that support results in those publications, to host reference data sets for the community, and to encourage reuse of image data, particularly with the aim of enabling new research, both fundamental biological insights, but also better image analysis techniques, opportunities for benchmarking on reference data sets, and so on. Our scope is extremely broad, so we take data for all scales, from molecules to organisms, for all modalities. The primary constraint is that data should be either associated with a publication or have very clear value besides a single experiment. So something like a reference data set for benchmarking analysis algorithms, for example. And the reasoning behind that constraint is that we're not intending to replace local data management options for managing your data before you've published. We also, at the moment, can't take data that's associated with individuals, medical data associated with individuals, that may change in the future, but is a constraint at the moment. The archive has another purpose, which is to support added value databases, or AVDBs, which are resources focused on particular communities, particular categories of data that build on the core data and add extra use to that data. And the two that the BioImage Archive supports, and actually both of them predate the archive itself, are the IDR and Empire, which are also participants in this session, and so we will talk together about some of our challenges. But we expect that there will be future added value databases that we'll support. And if you're interested in finding out more of this model of core archive and added value resources, then there's a recent publication in Nature Methods, which, among other important things, talks about how this model can, should, and is working. So we provide our services in three main groups. So the red block are what I think of as the core functions of an archive. So providing ways to get data into the archive, get data out of the archive, search and link data, and particularly those latter two things require the right metadata in order to do that. The green block relates to things surrounding the archive. So we're part of a wide, vibrant, exciting bioimaging community, of which the OME community is a very important part. And we interact with all of that community, but particularly, as I mentioned previously, added value databases and community resources which build on the BioImage Archive. And then the remaining piece, the blue part, is the features that we add that are specific to image data, and they provide, in a sense, the way we stand apart from a generic archive, so ways to kind of get at the inside of image data. And actually those are the things that we're going to be building more of in the future. Another view of this is that things in the upper half of the slide are the outward facing services that I described, so what users will consume. And then the bottom half are the things we need to build in order to make those things happen, in order to support them. So where is the archive now? Well, we launched in the summer of 2019, so it's coming up to 2 years old. The back end of the BioImage Archive is currently provided by another database at EBI called BioStudies, which takes general data that don't fit into one of the structured archives at the EBI, which in a sense is where bioimage data was when we started off. We're now moving out of that, which is why we're going to be building up our own back end. I'll get into that more in a little bit. And although we have been around for nearly 2 years, development will be accelerating considerably this year because we now have a team in place, of which I am the first member, and we're currently recruiting for more. So by the autumn or thereabouts, we'll have a 4-person group focused full-time on the BioImage Archive. And we currently support both IDR and Empire, primarily at the moment through back-end storage, and Empire is also another EBI resource, so we communicate quite regularly. Thinking about where we're going, I've divided our roadmap into 3 categories of timescale. Roughly speaking, they're what we're going to do next in the next sort of 3 to 6 months, what's coming after that for about a year or so, and then what's in the future beyond that. And like most projection and road mapping exercises, as things go further into the future, they become more uncertain. For the next 3 months, and this is really the period which is over which we're recruiting, so our sort of person strength will be building up throughout this. The main things we're going to do are firstly to improve the submission experience, because at the moment, if you've used the BioImage Archive, you may have found that the landing page is perhaps a little bit more confusing than it should be, and it's not quite clear why you suddenly end up in BioStudies. I've explained that it's the back-end database, but I think we could make it clearer how submission is working at the moment quite quickly. We're going to implement a new metadata schema called REMBI, which I'm going to talk about on the next slide. And we're also going to start the process of building a joint submission system with IDR. So I think it's been a long goal that really submission to IDR should go into the BioImage Archive first, so that people who are under time pressure, for example for publications, to get an accession identifier quickly, can get their data into the archive, but then start the more in-depth process of data curation necessary to kind of get the quality of the data to the point where it can go into IDR. And I think that would benefit all of us, which is why I'm keen to start that process. So I mentioned REMBI, and REMBI stands for Recommended Metadata for Biological Images, and it's the result of several community workshops and quite a bit of work on thinking about what sort of metadata is specific to bioimaging that we should have in the image archive in order to make the images maximally useful in the future. And you can read more about it in another Nature Methods publication that's coming out very soon, but it's split into different categories representing the different stages of imaging, from acquisition and analysis and possibly correlation, depending on what you're doing with your images. And REMBI, if you read the paper, is actually really more a set of guidelines and categories than a very, very detailed specific schema. And therefore quite a lot of the work in implementing REMBI will be deciding how to implement those different categories and make the careful balance between making it reasonable for submitters to get the required metadata, because if it's too complicated nobody will want to use the archive, but making sure there's enough to make the images reusable. And I suspect that will be an iterative process as we go through that. Then the stage after that is really when we've got our full development team in place, and there'll be quite a bit of building new back-end systems to support the archive at that point. But then the first sort of outward-facing visible results of that will be new submission tools that are more image-aware and image-specific, and also a web portal that is also more image-aware and image-specific. Following that, actual visibility of the images in the archive at a level beyond just here is a large container format with lots of image data in it. That itself is actually potentially technically challenging because of the file formats problem, which is why we will not only monitor but also participate in the community effort working on next generation file formats as much as we can. Then down the line beyond that, very keen that we work with people's pre-publication, what you might call local data management systems. But Amero is obviously the main one, particularly in the context of this community, and how we might make it easier to submit directly from Amero into the BioImage Archive, because that makes everybody's lives easier because there's less metadata to get. You can get critical metadata earlier and so on. That again will probably be quite dependent on how the file format work progresses. Another thing that we'd like to do once we're in a position to be able to do internal conversion of images is to offer out those converted images in the form of a rich API, so that, for example, you can get individual planes of three-dimensional images, you can get time points from time series, you can get some of the embedded metadata in those images. We also actually have already an environment coupled closely to the BioImage Archive for doing some lightweight analysis of images, and in fact running a training course on that in the summer together with the IDR folks and a number of other teams. And we'll continue on that from now onwards, but I think the initial focus will be getting the core archive systems up in place, but after that I think we'll be working more on that analysis environment, and then in the further future those will give us a really good basis to encourage the development of future added value resources, because they can consume those services, at which point as those grow we'll need to think about how the governance rules and systems for those work. And if I put all those together into the single roadmap slide, it looks like this. So I won't go through all of these because I have effectively just done that, but you can pause the video and you're very, very welcome to ask me questions about these things. What I should also say is that this is not absolutely set in stone. Some of these things need to happen before others. In particular, we need to build the back-end systems in order to make later things work. But I'm very, very open to suggestions and comments from the community if there are things you really want to see earlier than other things, if you have particular thoughts on how these will work. I'm here and very interested in what you have to say. So I will finish then by thanking a few people, in particular the large group from a Zoom screenshot is the ecosystem group, which is sort of our scientific advisory group. They're extremely helpful, supportive, a great group of people to help us get up and running and promote the work we do and ask us sort of good critical challenging questions. But the many other people both at EMBL EBI and outside that have supported what we do and are part of what we do. And I should also finally thank our funders. So our two primary funders are UKRI, who fund our infrastructure, and EMBL, who fund our people. But we're building on the work of a large number of funding organisations who are the group that you could see in the bottom right. And I shall finish here and look forward very much to participating in the discussion sessions and workshops. And thank you for listening or viewing.